The next trend that we see happening is a real emphasis on social advertising and social media advertising. And I think we all know that organic reach is at its lowest ever point unless your content is extremely viral. Um, and that is whenever you post something on Facebook or maybe Instagram and you have 10,000 followers, but maybe only 10% or even as low as 5 or 6% actually see that piece of content. And due to various algorithms, due to saturated content, due to so many people posting on that platform. So there's now going to be even more emphasis on paying to get your content out there in front of your audience and future audiences and potential audiences and so on. But we'll also see, and I'm going to reference a Hootsuite survey here in terms of maybe smarter paid social advertising. Hootsuite did a survey of over 18,000 of their members and marketers from numerous industries and numerous industry influencers and authorities and so on. And they conducted many interviews. And they asked them how they plan to spend their social media budget, social media advertising budget over the next 12 months. And as you can see, a lot of them are going to maintain the spend on the bigger platforms like Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. But what you'll see is a shift with an increase in spend in platforms that you may not have considered before, or you may not have put much maybe time and effort into. And this is globally, of course. And so things like Pinterest, Snapchat, Clubhouse, TikTok, these platforms where more marketers are going to spend more of their money. And I suppose why are they, do they intend to do that? Well, let's maybe explore some of those reasons. And I think it's widely accepted, the Facebook and Instagram are still considered to be the most effective social media platform for building a brand awareness, for reaching business goals and so on. So I think that is still widely accepted. But there is this sort of shift towards advertising on other platforms. And there's numerous studies here, one commissioned by TikTok, Snapchat, and Pinterest, and where they found that consumers found that TikTok ads were more inspiring and enjoyable than ads on other platforms. Snapchat also found that their ads reached more than some TV ads, and they generated greater awareness and more purchase intent across the funnel. And then Pinterest also found that they had a higher return on investment and cheaper conversion rates than ads on other social media networks. So maybe that's playing some sort of influence as to why marketers are going to invest more in maybe these platforms this year than across, or increase their spend in these platforms than other platforms. Other potential reasons, less messaging fatigue on these platforms. So maybe they're not as saturated. So Pinterest and Snapchat and TikTok are less saturated with ads than the likes of Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, where brands are maybe all advertising and saying the same things. One thing about these platforms is that they really encourage advertisers to make content and ads that fit organically into the platform. So we mentioned, TikTok were really pushing the idea of, don't make ads, make TikToks. So and Pinterest also had a campaign around, stop interrupting and start inspiring. So instead of interrupting somebody's viewing habits on social media with an ad, blend it in and inspire them with an ad. And Snapchat had something similar in terms of, they were telling advertisers to be part of the conversation, rather than try to start conversations or try to promote the product. So there's a little bit of shift in terms of, creating almost ads that are native to the platform that don't look like ads. They fit in with the content. And Is that because consumers are becoming wise to the sameness of social advertising, where I've heard lots of people say, "Oh, I only see ads on Facebook now. Facebook's gone to the dogs," and all these types of things. But maybe consumers are catching on to that. Just don't get me wrong, Facebook is still very effective, and I wouldn't, pull all my advertising spend from Facebook and put it into these channels. But it's something that you may need to keep an eye on over the next 12 months or so. And another element is that, are people holding brands to a higher standard when it comes to creativity? So, our consumers, our businesses wanting, more creativity from the ads rather than, an image and a bit of text and a button. Something to consider. And out of that report from Hootsuite, one of the key findings was that brands that want to stand out in 2002 will have to work harder to create ads that mirror and enrich the distinct experience offered by each social network. So, businesses essentially need to work harder with the creative element of their ads, rather than thinking about the return that they might get. So they need to up their game essentially. So not only are people looking at different platforms to explore for their social advertising this year, it's also going to become a bit more smarter and maybe a little bit more sophisticated, potentially due to the fact that Google is planning to phase out cookie tracking by 2023. And I think we all know that Facebook is already unable to track Apple users, iOS users, on the platform as well, due to the latest iOS updates, which don't allow that. And what that basically means is that, typically what Google have done and other social platforms like Facebook and LinkedIn, they have, if you visited various websites, you could have a cookie planted in your browser via like the Facebook pixel or the LinkedIn code snippet, and you've been remarketed to. So if you visited a website, you'll see then ads in the news feed of the website that you visited and so on. It's the same with Google. You'll find, you visited maybe some website and it's followed you around the internet for a while in various advertising spaces and so on. And that whole cookie tracking is being phased out, and that's a privacy issue and a data protection issue that these big tech companies are trying to phase out because they're under pressure and under various scrutiny and so on. So that's going to phase out. So to counteract that, businesses, are going to try and develop more data-driven strategies using metrics to really understand like user interests, preferences, behaviors. So and they're going to try and start to build a profile of their consumers or their audience, or their customers. So things like, even as simple as age demographics, gender perhaps, location, behaviors in terms of what they research online, their interests, what else they're engaged with, where do they prefer to see content, how do they prefer to see content? Is it a video format, an image format? So they're really going to start to build these personas, because you won't have the luxury of being able to remarket the people that have been on your website. So you'll have to start to build these customer profiles or audience personas. So the ads are going to become a bit more sophisticated and smarter over the next 12 months or so.